Today we have a special episode. We're joined by Mary Richardson, who's an expert in trauma recovery, codependence recovery, and addiction counseling. Mary, it's so good to have you. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with you both.
So today we're going to talk about codependence. And let's start off by sharing two definitions that I found of codependence. And I'm curious to hear what each of you think of that definition and how you relate to it in your own experience. So the first one, codependence is when you take responsibility for others' emotions and problems while losing touch with your own needs and limits. The next definition, codependence is a survival pattern learned in childhood where you learned to manage others' feelings to feel safe and loved. So, Mary, how do you relate to those definitions and how does it relate to your personal experience with codependence?
Yeah, both of those relate. There's no one way of being codependent. For myself, I had to simplify it because it can be so complicated. At least it was when I was working on it in my own life. So I look at it as codependent is a fearful way that I'm relational with myself, that I'm relational with you, that I'm relational with a higher power, with the environment, with my dog. It's the fearful way that I am relational in that way. And definitely all of that came for me, came from all the conditioning I received growing up on how I was going to stay safe and have any semblance of feeling some love in my family. So I definitely relate to both of those definitions.
Yeah. And Mitra, what about you?
I think yes, for me too. First of all, I'm so happy to have Mary here, but also, as far as definition is concerned, it is when one's well-being depends on another person more than it needs to. Because in a sense, we are all interconnected. And of course, and the hierarchy of interconnectedness differs for everybody. Is my family, my loved ones, my community, the world. But when it's more than, it takes more space than it needs to. Um, Putting aside special occasions, that like if a loved one is unwell or something specific is happening in the world, that's different. But in a normal circumstance, for me, when it's, I just can't find my well-being because of somebody else, to me is an unhealthy, um, codependency, which basically interdependency has gone wrong in that case for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I relate to the definition that talks about safety, I really relate to. I remember in my household, it was just volatile. Um, Things were not easy for my parents. There were times when um, mom would get emotional, and that I really felt her emotions. When I was reflecting on this, I realized that as a kid, I really tried to adapt my behavior so that she would not go into those states, so that I would feel safe because I felt unsafe when she would feel sad or angry or whatever she was going through. So I really related to that. And also, what was interesting as I was reflecting on this is that what a norm it was in my upbringing and in our culture, Mitra, and in the Persian culture and in many cultures, really. Um, the normalcy of um, parents and family being enmeshed in our decision making and in our life. This idea of my independence, it's just like a blurry line about what my independence is. And to be a good son would be to, um, you know, take responsibility for feelings and emotions that my mom has that really I don't have control over, but it's an expression of love. That's how I was raised. This is it. To love is to be enmeshed. To love is to take on a family member's emotions, even if they're irrational and don't make sense, and even if it crosses my own personal boundary. Why do each of you think that that is problematic? It's easy for someone to hear this and be like, "Well, it's fine. I've been going through my life, so what? I do care a lot about my son's feelings or my mother's feelings, and yeah, sure, we're enmeshed. What's the problem with that? How would you respond to that, Mary?
So for myself, I mean, the consequences brought me to a bottom.
Mm,
And I am also a recovering addict. I've been in recovery for 43 years. And what happened is for myself, I started drinking and using very early in my life, in childhood, because of the trauma that was going on in my home. It was a way to medicate and to survive it, for lack of a better word, just to be able to survive it at that point. So when I got into recovery from drugs and alcohol, all those feelings started to come up that I had medicated for many years. I was in a new marriage at that time. I was, a mother to two kids and a mother and a stepmother to two other kids at that point. I was pretty dysfunctional.
mm.
And so I didn't want to live that way. It was miserable. So I sought help. Thank goodness there was places here in Phoenix that treated codependence. And I went and got into therapy and started working on it. My emotional bottom is what drew me to get help for it. And then I realized that my codependence is my relapse issues. So,
Interesting.
yeah,
That's
so
really
for being a
interesting.
recovering addict, I needed to do is not only do recovery with my addiction, but also do recovery with my codependence so I didn't relapse in my addiction, because that's why I medicated to begin with.
Who were you codependent with? Like, was it your children or your parents? Like,
So
as in your
this is,
adult
I mean,
life?
all of the above, and the primarily it was with me. So I realized I could be codependent all by myself. I didn't need anybody, but what was going on inside of here, all that chatter
Oh,
that was
interesting.
happening.
All the voices, right?
Oh
Yeah.
my
Com
goodness. So all of that kept me self-centered because I was so focused on managing those voices that I was neglectful to my children. I was neglectful to my husband. I
wow.
was still enmeshed with my parents. Um, that trauma bonding that was there. But it was part of what was going on within me first that I had to deal with. Then I could look at my relationships.
I wonder how, as people listen to us, how they see their interdependency, if at all. But for me, Ben, to answer your question, for me, I think the growth of human beings stops when there is this enmeshed kind of relationship in forefront of our life. Because if I am feeling like you did as a child, we become fixers of other people, basically, in many ways, with emotional, financial, however it is, or practical every day, we become the fixers. And because in essence, energetically speaking, we're not supposed to be fixers for anybody's life. There's nothing to be fixed anyways, but we're responsible for our own really lives to begin with, first and foremost. This job becomes never ending and never fully satisfying because it wasn't mine anyways. How can I ensure, fill in the blank, my lover, my child, my mother, my brother, my client even, is, okay? It is an impossibility to command somebody else's life. I can hardly command mine. So it becomes a very difficult way of living. It takes more space than it needs to. And it's not even satisfying because it's not a healthy way of being. So it stops me in my growth, starts bringing resentment because when I can't fully satisfy myself and get what I want from this so-called overprotection and or over service to somebody else, then I start resenting them, not knowing that this is my own doing. It is me that I need to look at. It is not, I'm sure everybody's happy to receive services from us. I mean, I know I can just hear people who are listening saying, because that's what my clients say, but Mitra, they love it. They encourage it. Of course they do. I mean, if you came and did everything for me, I'm not silly. I will welcome it unless I'm a healthy person and I see that as a problem. So it is not at their end that this needs to come to an end. It is at mine that because I love you and because I respect my journey, I'm not going to do more than I need to. And I will have boundaries for forgiving and being connected with you.
Well, Mary, thank you for sharing your story, and I think what a blessing it was for you because you literally reached a point where you had no choice. Either continue in a downward spiral or, you know, do something to get yourself out of it. And I can relate to it in my own way. I wasn't addicted to substances. I was addicted to, you know, ways of being. I was addicted to my guilt and I was addicted to work. And I reached, you know, my own bottom and I just didn't have a choice. And there's a lot of people who are in codependent relationships, Mitra, many of which are your clients, who haven't reached a point, a pain threshold that is motivating enough for them to want to change or address that behavior. And so for anyone listening who might, you know, admit that there is some codependency, um, how can you, Mitra, help them see what the drawback is actually to them, what the cost is to them and to their uh, whoever their loved one, whoever that is?
I think sustainability. And how do you feel? Does that serve you? Because if you really ask that question, people know that this is not serving them. So no, it's okay. The problem with continuation, and I would love to hear Mary's opinion as an expert and as a survivor of codependency, is that it feels in a very unhealthy way right, and the world, and of course the receivers of them normally, they all encourage it. It's just what a wonderful person you are to do this and that. So there's a lot of cover-ups. And the question is, how does that feel to you? Not do you get praised for it? Do you get rewarded for it? Or do you feel that you've fulfilled your responsibility? Those are wrong questions because the answer usually is yes. But if you say, how does that feel to you? When you think about this person, what is the feeling? Is it lightness or is it heaviness and burden? And I think to me, that feeling is very much telling. And then at the practical level, is this sustainable? Can you day in, day out do this? And if it's not, then we weren't supposed to do.
And so I think the key driver, as you're sharing this, Mitra, and Mary, I'm curious to get your perspective too. You know, guilt is such a key driver, the avoidance of guilt. As you're talking, I'm thinking about my own experience. Even things as simple as I know that I'm tired and exhausted. A good friend of mine invited me to a gathering that he's hosting, and out of guilt, I decide to go. And out of wanting to appeal to him and not making him angry, I decide to go. And I'm really just abandoning myself because what I needed was rest that night. But the guilt, when I think back, would be, you know, for me, somewhat overwhelming. And the guilt is what kept me continuing that behavior. With closer family members, with parents, it's even stronger, right? And so, how does one look at and address the guilt that is the other side of the codependence?
Yeah, for, probably the strongest areas that it showed up was with my husband, so my primary relationship, and then the relationship with my kids. Because I came from a significant trauma and abuse in my childhood, I didn't want to do that with my kids. So I basically swung 180 degrees to not being their best friend, not disciplining them, not teaching them, not, just trying to make their lives happy in that way and be their playmate. And I would do that out of that place of I never felt like I was enough,
Mm,
and so that was one of my strong codependent messages is I wasn't enough. So in my marriage, I wasn't enough. So of course I would feel both guilt and shame.
mm,
The shame telling me I'm not enough, and the guilt, which is about my behaviors, saying I'm not doing enough.
mm,
I'm
Oh,
not giving enough. I'm not,
mm,
all of those enoughs that are there
not that.
until I'm just in chronic self-abandonment. And
mm,
so I don't know I didn't know who I was in
yep,
any of that outside of my roles in there. So it took a while for me. One of my abuses was sexual abuse from my childhood. That just takes tremendous time to, what I found out to work on. It's not something that happens overnight, so it took probably about 5 or 6 years for me to get right with all of that. And I would vacillate between enmeshment and avoidance,
mm,
back
yep,
and forth in my behaviors. And then the guilt and shame would come in because it didn't feel right. Like you were talking, Mitra, it doesn't feel sustainable inside. It doesn't feel right inside. I know what I'm doing isn't healthy, but I don't know how to stop it. Um, and so it just took a while to deal with that and to recognize, so like with the guilt, what I would use with myself is I would go, okay, guilt is my behaviors. It's about my personal integrity, values, all of that. So I kept asking myself, okay, am I outside of my value system right now? So if I say no, am I outside of my value system? No, I have to show up for myself first and foremost. Otherwise, I'm no good to anybody, which is what I saw with my husband and my kids. Um, and so I would play it I would just have little things that I would ask myself. The shame, it's like if it's a negative message, then that's a trauma message. So anything, in my opinion, anyways, learned in trauma is not true, and that, so I go, no, wait a minute, that's not even the truth. That whole dialoguing with myself was so important to stay out of the guilting and shaming of myself.
You brought up something really interesting that I think is important, which is about your values, knowing what you value, which I also see that as knowing what your needs are, your true needs are, and your boundaries. And if we're not clear on those things, then it's really hard to know where the boundary is. And I reflect back on my journey and getting familiar with my own needs and my own values was a journey and a process in and of itself, and a necessary journey and process in order for me to break free from the codependent habits, right? Which were really just limiting my free will, and disconnecting me from myself. Mitra, curious to hear your perspectives on this as well.
Hmm. It, to me, I think it's the job description we give ourselves in our relationships. What is my job description? What are my responsibilities? And I think that has helped me personally to almost write a job description. Of course, it's not to do filing, but it is like, am I fully responsible for somebody's well-being or happiness? And by doing that, actually, that statement, when I say that, it sounds like a selfless person who's paying more attention to somebody. It sounds really good, but it really comes from ego, that I think I am a more suitable person than you yourself to make sure that you're okay. Yeah, that's
That's
very,
another lens. Yeah, yeah, I
it's a
relate to
ego.
that.
Yeah.
Come on, really? This person came with all the equipments to be in this life, and my job is to just like take over their life. So that job description is very important. And also, I divide at least my own life from codependency as a child, which basically I didn't have, and then going to independency, where our puberty is all about. If you look at the puberty characteristic, it's just like, I want to be different than my family. If they don't like this, I'm going to do exactly opposite that. If they're believers, I'm a non-believer. If they're non-believers, I become religious. So it's just like saying, I am me. That's the statement. That's what puberty in emotional sense, energetic sense is. So that's the independence. And eventually in an evolved environment, we become interdependent, which means we've gone from codependency to independency to interdependency, that collectively as human beings, we rely on each other, but not on a day-to-day basis unless it's a special, event happening. So I ask myself, and I have a picture for myself of codependency, independency, and interdependency. And then I choose, where am I with this relationship as far as these three areas are concerned? Because there are times, for instance, that we need to become codependent. When I got COVID, I was very much codependent on my loved ones. Without their help, I couldn't eat, I couldn't survive, I couldn't have what I needed. But those are short-term things. So you accept it, which is also important to accepting, because a person who's very independent, they cannot be codependent when it's needed. So it's really understanding the situation and where you are in life, and then deciding which one is the healthiest. The healthiest is interdependence as a general rule, of course. But there are buts. There are times that I'm being harmed emotionally and I completely go independent. I can be amongst 80 people and be completely emotionally independent. In fact, I make sure that I'm emotionally independent because I'm feeling not, as you called it, safe. I'm not feeling connected. I'm feeling harmed, however you want to say it, by this gathering, by this collective energy. So I go independent. But then I also look at what's going on in other times as far as these three stages are concerned.
I love what you're sharing right now. And what I hear you saying is it's really not about defining and labeling things. It's really about attuning to self at any given moment, at any given circumstance,
Yes.
and different situations, different circumstances call for different ways to show up. And
Yes.
you actually intuitively know what's right for you in any given moment.
Everyone
When
does
you
that.
have COVID, you knew that you needed to be codependent. You relied on other people. When you are in a social environment there's a lot happening and you don't resonate with that energy, being independent and not interdependent is actually what is the best thing for you. And as a baseline, yeah, interdependence. We use the definitions really as guidelines, but not as a strict way of being. If our pattern is being consistently codependent, which means we are consistently in some way abandoning ourselves and relinquishing our own free will, then we got to ask ourselves, yeah, how does that make me feel? Do I feel happy, free? Do my relationships feel healthy? Are they harmonious? Am I professionally achieving at the level that I want to be achieving? You know, um, these things can all be really telling.
It's in
Mary, yeah, I want to
I
hear
was
from
gonna
you.
say, it's interesting. I see things just a tiny bit different in that, because I have a lot of people come up to me and they say, "Aren't we all codependent?" And, and absolutely our humanness, I think, can bring about all the patterns that are there with codependence. I know for me, when I define codependence, codependence has consequences. Like say with COVID, if I'm needing my family to help me, that is negotiating my needs. That is taking care of myself, asking for help. So I don't see that as being codependent. I see that as healthy behavior.
Interesting. Okay.
So codependence for me does not allow choice. It's like I have to,
Mm,
or else because I'm having to fix something inside of me in there. So it's just a little bit different, take on that. I think with boundaries, we can be we know when to share. Like sometimes I'm in, I do a lot of public speaking. I'm in front of a lot of crowds. I'm not going to be overly vulnerable at those times. I'm going to have healthy boundaries that say, I'm going to share what I don't care the whole world knows. But some of those private things, I have private people, or I have people that I will be very vulnerable with, because I know that those are safe relationships. And so for me, I've learned in my recovery and in my life to be able to know when I engage those self-care boundaries and when not. But I can always tell when I've not come from a place of choice that I'm in my codependence. I always get one is that survival part of my brain gets activated, and I shut down my wisdom. So
Hmm.
I can just hear it in my speech, if nothing else, but I can also feel it in my body.
Mm.
My body feels different when I'm in codependence.
Yep. Yeah, I feel you on that.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
I've done a lot of body work as well as emotional work, as well as intellectual spirit, all I approached it from every area I could, because it was about my human development. I had to do my codependence healing, my trauma healing, because they're connected. I had to do that in a way that went through every area of how I developed as a human being. I had some friends that they're really focused on the emotional piece, which is important. But if I don't change my thinking, if I don't change how my body feels, and resonate and be connected, somatically within my body, then probably that's going to come back around, because I'm not doing it holistically,
Yeah.
and that's what worked for me. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I appreciate you sharing that it's a holistic process and that there's multiple layers to this. There's the guilt and the shame. There's Mitra, what you brought up, the significance that we find from being quote unquote useful to our loved ones and being the savior. Um, there's multiple layers to that. And what comes to my mind when I'm thinking about my journey of um, overcoming it, one of the first steps for me was asking questions to myself, being curious about
Mhm.
it, and just becoming aware of its presence, and not necessarily having to do anything to fix it or change it, but understanding it first, because I went through so much of my life not even being aware that it was there, that I was doing those things. The awareness of it alone, just shining the light on it and asking ourselves, wait, is this codependent behavior?
Mhm.
Or wait, do I feel like, am I doing this because I feel like I have to or because I want to? How do I feel in my body? That's been a big one for me. We're calling it codependence, but really when I'm, abandoning some part of myself, I feel a tightness, I feel a
Mhm.
constriction in my body. And just becoming aware of what I feel like when I'm making a choice that is a have to choice versus a choice that is I want to, I'm inspired to choice. And and that awareness, I think, can be so powerful, and in it of itself begins the journey of healing.
Yes. So it goes to intention. But I just want to
Mhm.
address something that Mary said that was very interesting. As I was listening to you, I realized that codependence for you, you're using it as probably because you're an expert in the area, as as a human condition that needs to be treated. Codependence to me is one of the natural state of human being. And I don't see it as a problem unless it's in an inappropriate use of that, because children are codependent on us. It is very appropriate for us to be codependent on our parents. In fact, when we're not traumas, as you called it, get formed. But it's interesting that you're seeing it as something that needs to be avoided or needs to be treated. I'm seeing it as one of the states that, as I said, sometimes I welcome it, I recognize it, and I happily, by choice, go there. And and I don't see it as something that I need to avoid it. except for the times that are not healthy to be in that relationship. But going back to what you were saying, Ben, it's really the intention, I think. And that has been actually very helpful when you said that, has been very helpful for me, especially when I behave in the family setting, either, family or extended even family. When I say something or I do something, I ask myself, why am I doing this? Is it because it feels natural to me, or am I playing that, role again that comes, as you rightly called it, from traumas of childhood, that I need to perform, that I need to be in my case, I had to be the wise girl. Everybody told me, oh, you are so wise. And it sounds so good, doesn't it? But it wasn't, because it took away my childhood. I never ever made mess like children did. I never made mistakes like children did. There would be like 40 kids playing and one adult will come to the room. I say, oh, thank God, Mitra, you're there. And they're going to be okay. And that sounds so good, but it was so destructive. I was not allowed to make mistakes and be a child. I wasn't allowed to go and break things like everybody else did, because I was the wise one. I was the one who was always together. And, and I wasn't, because I was a kid. I still am not. Even as an adult, I'm not. But it was a huge job to give to a child, that you
Mhm.
basically steal their childhood in every sense. I remember a cousin of mine went to Europe and brought souvenirs for all the kids. I never forget the scene. And they were one short, and there were older kids than me and younger kids than me. Everybody got one. And she called me over and she said, you're the only wise one that will understand that we don't have enough. So don't
Yeah.
worry. So I don't have anything for you. And I remember as a child, I realized I must not be giftable, because everybody got a gift and I must be not giftable. And to this day, Mary, I have problem accepting gifts, and I've resolved it. I'm understanding it. I've shed light on it. I've done deep, deep spiritual, psychological, somatic work, like for 40 something years. I know what it is, but still, if, tomorrow, Ben, and he knows, he invited me for my birthday. I haven't cashed in yet. I have difficulty receiving gifts because of these patterns in childhood that stay with you, that you're the wise one. You shouldn't lose it.
Mhm.
You're the one who never objects. You're the one who always understands. And that's not
Yeah.
human.
No. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for listening.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I relate to it from a different way, different roles, but that conditioning that is there, that I received. I was the youngest in my family. And so I was, um, there to be my dad's child. He was
Mm,
coached, so he had 3 girls, and I was the last chance at having a boy, but that was one of my conditionings, is I was supposed to be the boy of the family, so I did all these sports. I would, if I could beat a boy on the basketball, court, then I felt good about myself. Maybe dad would approve of me, just that jumping through hoops, I think, that kids get into sometimes, trying to do the right thing. Again, I think, Ben, you said it in the beginning, for that safety and love. I want to be seen in a healthy way, in a loving way, by my parents. I never felt like I accomplished that with them.
mm,
Unfortunately, my mom and I had beautiful healing experiences before she passed away. And we were able to reconcile things. My father, who was my main abuser, even though I tried, there was no, we weren't able to resolve anything in that relationship before he passed. But I was inside. So I was able to go be with him during that process. And I had gotten through that forgiveness with him, through that process, that he had to have been wounded as well. That's a other thing that helped me a lot with my own codependence is that it's intergenerational. So there's
Mhm.
nobody to blame.
Yeah.
It's people doing the best they could, or they're acting out their own traumas on their children, or they're trying to fix like I tried to fix all my traumas through my children, by doing the
Yep.
opposite.
Yep.
And the blame piece just doesn't work. It's all humans trying to do the best that they can do. And I believe that 100%, no matter what somebody is doing. I think there's always something if there is that dysfunction that is going on, that I see in people, it helps me with my boundaries with them to know, okay, then if they're acting inappropriately, there's some woundedness there. I don't have to take it on. I can send them love. I don't have to put up with it. I can have some boundaries and say, I'm not willing to be treated that way, but I don't have to take it on anymore today. And I took everything on um,
Mm.
before. The process of healing for me has just been so remarkable of going. I feel like I'm pretty much a normal human being today. Which sounds kind of funny, but where my going into my codependence is so limited today because it's so uncomfortable inside. I don't like it anymore.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
So I do something about it right away. Yeah.
So, for you, the listener, are there any areas in your life where you have noticed that you have had some sort of conditioning from childhood that is driving this codependent behavior? Just take a moment to reflect on that. And there's nothing you need to do about it. It's just becoming aware of it. We're shining the light on some of these things. Now, Mary, you brought up boundaries. Boundaries are a key to setting ourselves free and honoring our needs when we're in a codependent relationship. What are boundaries? How would you define them for yourself? And what are not boundaries? Because I know that I went through a process. It took time for me to actually figure out what's a real boundary and what's not.
Yeah, yeah. So what was taught to me, the areas of development, and Mitra, I'd like to hear your point, your reflection on this, but is that there is physical, emotional, sexual, spiritual, intellectual, that those are kind of the 5 areas we develop as humans. So boundaries are how I self-care in each one of those areas. What is okay and not okay for me to experience in each one of those areas, and then it is my job and nobody's job to honor my boundaries, but it's my job to engage them and communicate them if I feel like my boundaries are being violated or crossed, or, most times people don't know they're doing that, when that happens. What I had to learn in the beginning, because I was boundaryless. So I just, of course, took everything in there, is I went over to walls for a period of time. But I needed,
I
truly,
did that too.
yeah, it's like I needed to do that though to feel that extreme, to be able to get into that middle area. I needed to be able to say no to every single thing that came along my way in order to be able to know when I wanted to say no and when I wanted to say yes. I would guess a lot of people may relate to that, but going in those, when I'm trying to change something, I go over to the opposite extreme for a while till that balanced area comes in. Um, there was somebody that I had done some work with early on. Her name was Pia Melody, and she said, you have to, for anybody dealing with trauma, that you have to go into Pain City and live there for a little while before you can then go over to having righteous anger around the trauma. And then you can get into forgiveness, so you can make that balanced place inside. But that's boundaries
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
appreciate you mentioning that, you kinda your journey involved you going to the other end of the spectrum, putting up walls, because I definitely can relate to that. And I think, sometimes we need to go through that to just understand what the opposite end of the spectrum is, and then also get a taste of the downsides of the opposite end of the spectrum. Sometimes we just need to experience, okay, I go to the opposite end of the spectrum. Being on any extreme is not healthy, and we get feedback. Life gives us feedback of that, and then with that feedback, as long as we continue to be curious and aware and ask ourselves questions, we can guide ourselves towards the middle. When I was exploring boundaries, sometimes I would set boundaries that involved other people behaving a certain way, and
Uh-huh.
that's not a boundary. For example, I did business with my mother. Was you can't show up late, right? And the thing is that she has every right to show up late. It's just that my boundary would be the correct boundary would be that after a certain threshold, I'm not willing to have the meeting. I'm going to go on with my day, right? That's my boundary. So that's something that I got confused with in the beginning. And Mitra, I'm curious to hear your perspective on this because I mean, you're dealing with people all the time who are learning about boundaries and how to set them and whatnot. So,
Yeah.
what are your
Boundary
thoughts on this?
to me, boundaries are only my responsibility. So as soon
Yeah.
as anybody else says anything, it's like, yeah, you can always not come, you can come late, you can not show up, you can come cursing, you can do anything you want. But the question is, how do I, and that is self-responsibility. And it's very interesting talking about codependency. When you take too much responsibility for others, we usually don't have enough to take it for ourselves. So usually people who are codependent or act in function in a fixing situation, there is not much left for their own boundaries. I'm just too exhausted. So what I ask for is for you to be different, for me to feel different, which is a most unhealthy behavior. We're saying that I want you to be this way or behave this way or have this or not have this in order for me to feel. And that
Hmm.
way I've really compromised my, um, I call it emotional independence. I've written about it. I've compromised my own because I'm now begging.
Hmm.
I'm whether I'm huffing and puffing, like I'm sure you did with your mom, or I am uh, literally begging. I'm saying, please be a certain way for me to feel good.
Uh-huh.
Mm.
That's
You
basically
bring as
what
you're
I've done.
sharing this, it brings up something for me
Uh,
that was really important in understanding boundaries. The key to a boundary is my willingness to walk away,
Uh-huh.
my willingness to let go of that interaction, my willingness to give that relationship a break, my willingness to relinquish being right. But the key to setting a boundary is being willing to go either way. If they honor my boundary, then great, we can continue. If they don't, I need to be willing to walk away. That piece was really, it took time for me to get that, to get comfortable with walking away. Like one of the boundaries that I had struggled with was with a loved one who would sometimes talk to me in an aggressive way. And my boundary was that if we're going to talk, we need to talk. I want you to talk to me in a respectful manner. And if you don't want to, well, it took time to get to the point where I said, if you don't want to, that's okay. I just won't entertain this conversation. But in the beginning, what it looked like was you're talking to me that way. I already told you, don't talk to me that way. Why are you talking to me that way? And I'm going into an argument about
their
upholding
behavior.
my boundary with them
Right.
instead of just saying, okay, you're talking to me in a tone that I don't appreciate. So if you can't change your tone, that's okay. I'm just going to end this conversation. And there were many conversations I had to end. And it's not ending in with aggression. It's not ending, out of anger. It's just honoring my boundary. I'm gonna honor it and I'm gonna walk away. And of course, that person learned over time. Now they know. They just they don't talk to me in that way anymore because they just know that I'm willing to honor it. Yeah.
And if they don't, that's fine too. There are people who will never
And
find
that's
us,
okay, and
and
sometimes they
that's
don't, and I
okay.
don't need if I respect
Exactly.
and I honor myself
Yes.
and my well-being and my joy, then I don't need that person in my life if they're not gonna honor my needs and
Yeah.
boundaries. Yeah.
Well, the person is in my life. I'm saying this because I can hear people saying, but what do I do? Like they've never learned. I don't do this to teach them a lesson. I'm doing this to
It's a
protect
key
me.
point.
Mhm.
That's a
Huge
key,
thing.
key point.
Because if
Yes.
the intention is like, you better learn, Ben, you don't speak to me like that, then I'm still begging for a behavior, except
Yeah.
it's hidden.
Yep.
I'm still
Yeah.
saying, please be appropriate and respectful. And if you're not, I'm going to lose it. And I think it's important to know that I have given up. So the intention before the walking out, so it's a decision. It's very important that I'm fully responsible for my well-being emotionally and otherwise. So if I talked about job description, I am full-time, full responsible for me, and then whatever I need to do, I will do. Sometimes I have to leave. Sometimes I have to intervene. Sometimes I have to stop even the conversation from going there. You know, you start speaking and I say, Ben, I'm sorry, I'm not going to talk about that. It's just not good for my well-being. And I just don't go there. But that's important to understand because a lot of people do that. And then they come back and they tell me, Mitra, I did what we discussed, but they didn't change it. They're like,
Right.
I didn't say to go and behave, in this way so you can
Mhm.
change the world. But I can just, I heard it as, that's a
Uh-huh.
like a bell going on. But yeah,
Yeah, that
Mary,
is so
what say
key.
you? What say you?
Oh goodness, I relate to that as well, just in my work with clients that I work with, and I will do the same thing. I will teach them about boundaries, and they'll come back and they'll go, but it didn't turn out well. And that's like, but did you do this for yourself? Or did you have expectations attached that, that control in a sense of changing somebody else's behavior, in there. And I like that, that simple definition of knowing, where I begin and end and, and you start, so we really have this clear definition of, what my being is a separate from your being, even though we're all interconnected, um, in some way, that I am all I have. So I am if I'm going to take care of myself and practice healthy self-care, I'm the only one who can do that. It's not anybody else's responsibility. And that is a powerful, that place of what you're talking about, both of you talking about with the self-responsibility. That is I think a big difference in boundaries and walls, and boundaries and
Yeah.
control, and boundaries and manipulation, and that when we're just in our boundaries, we are in loving self-care.
Yeah. Yeah. And what that feeling is quite a lovely feeling to honor oneself's boundaries and to still love a person who might not be choosing to um, honor our boundaries. That feeling is a really empowering feeling. For me, it's an embodiment of my free will, and that improves all of my relationships. It improves all areas of my life because there's just less tension, there's less weight in the relationships that I have, and I can be lighter in the world, and I can be more creative. And as I'm more creative, I'm, doing things that I enjoy more, and I'm able to add more value and be of service. So it's really it creates such wonderful ripples, and I think not only for the self, but I've noticed in my journey that the people that I was most codependent with, who I did this work with, they've learned from it as well. And I've seen how their relationships, because I've been a model for them, their relationships with other people in their lives have changed as a result of the changes that I've made, and of me learning to understand my boundaries and to speak the boundaries. Mary, what would you say? Some relationships are a little bit more intense than others. For someone who is in we'll just say a toxic relationship, it's a primary relationship. If they're in this relationship and they're having challenges expressing their boundaries and whatnot. What do you recommend for those people? Do they need guidance? Do you recommend that they get help, and how do you recommend they get help?
Yeah, and I've worked with a lot with the domestic violence community. So really looking at that extreme of toxic. I think toxic shows up in different ways. Sometimes it's physically, sometimes it's verbally. Where there may be a lot of gaslighting, telling somebody how they think and feel over and over and over again. And part of um, when I'm working with somebody, I also have been in toxic relationships, and so I was able to, like, reflect back when I was in those relationships. I could say my husband's in my relationship when we first got together started to border on toxic because we both were in recovery from addictions, and we hadn't dealt with the codependence and the trauma. And so we were projecting that out onto each other, trying to use each other to feel safe in that way. So sometimes, like I did therapy. I also did a peer support group where, there were a lot of people that were dealing with codependence. And so there was peer to peer support in that. So there was kind of grassroots, just being with people who were working on this and trying to get into a place of having healthier relationships. That was profound for me to know that I wasn't alone because I thought there was really something wrong with me. Ken and I used to talk about if this didn't work, we're going to go live on a mountaintop separately and not engage with anybody, you know, and really thought I was broken. And it took some time to find out it wasn't about being broken. I was conditioned. And that was a huge difference in there. But what I tell people is if you feel in danger at all, and I would have done this for myself, is you may need to get a temporary separation in that relationship, get some therapeutic help, but reach out. There's varying degrees of toxicity. So I think some of the peer support groups can be helpful in that for the lower levels of toxicity, and people can help themselves through that. But if it gets severe into where there's some consistent emotional and or physical abuse or sexual abuse going on, then you need to maybe do a therapeutic separation and get some therapy for both people.
Yep.
If the other person's not willing to, definitely for the person that's feeling victimized.
Thank you. Well, this was a rich conversation.
Mm.
We we talked about what codependence is, what it means to each one of us. We talked about why it's significant and why it's relevant to all of us, to audit and see, where do we have codependent relationships and how is that holding us back in our lives. We talked about our individual stories and our journeys with that and the healing journeys with that, and finally about boundaries, the significance of boundaries and what they are and what they're not. Really, we just scratched the surface there. There's so much more to talk about this topic, but I think it's enough for this conversation. Is there anything Mary, you would like to add before we end it?
Oh my goodness, there could be so many things. So, what I will end that with it is has my healing process through my codependence and the trauma. As I said, I see them as connected. Has been the most profound experience to getting to a place of self love, self care, self acceptance within me, and treasure beyond I could ever say for anybody, which is why I love helping other people get to that place. Um,
Thank you. And any last thoughts, Mitra?
Clarify your responsibilities in every relationship and check them as you go. And if you're going off the road, you need to look at it and you probably are in not interconnectedness state. So yeah, there's so many ways. But I think the main thing is to just look at it. Just know that we are, as Mary was saying, we are all affected because to me, very, very difficult people started parenting children. And there's no qualification, and there's no certification, and there's no condition for parenting. And hence we all bring people to this world without knowing what we're doing. So
Well, thank you, Mary, for joining
Thank
us.
you.
Thank you, Mitra. It's been a lovely conversation. And to you, the listener, we wish you a lovely week. And please, any comments or questions you have, please feel free to leave them in the comments section. All right. Until next time.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. For a list of the links and other resources referenced in this episode, check out the podcast description.
if you're benefiting from our podcast, we'd love if you could help us reach more people by subscribing. Your support means the world to us. From our hearts to yours, we thank you.